My daughter-in-law locked me out of the house the same morning I had just picked up $1 million check from the lottery office. I stood there in the cold, holding that check while she changed the locks behind the door I once called home. I didn't cry, not then, but something inside me cracked wide open. What do you do when the people who called you a burden have no idea you were never the one who needed them? Thanksgiving dinner. The whole house smelled like rosemary and butter and overcooked cranberry sauce. I had been in the kitchen since dawn, basting the turkey, layering the sweet potato casserole, folding the linen napkins, because Kayla insisted on presentation. But when it came time to sit, she guided me toward the old wooden chair near the kitchen doorway, the one with the uneven leg. Everyone else sat at the big table, laughing, refilling wine, passing dishes like they belonged. I was there too, but not really, just barely in frame. I heard someone say there weren't enough chairs that we'd make do this year, but the truth hung in the room like cigarette smoke. I wasn't a guest. I was an extra body they didn't know what to do with. I watched as Kayla poured wine for her sister, brought Lance a second helping. She never looked at me, not once. Not even when I coughed during grace or reached across for a napkin no one thought to leave near me. No eye contact, just silence, intentional. Later, when the pie was cut and the kitchen emptied out, Kayla came back in to clean. She glanced at the chair I was still sitting in, her voice light, casual. She said, "I think next year we might need a smaller gathering, less pressure for everyone." I nodded. My hand trembled a little on the cup I was rinsing. She didn't notice. Or maybe she did, but chose not to care. That night I couldn't sleep. I stared up at the ceiling fan in the guest room, the one that clicked unevenly as it spun. I counted the clicks. 67, then 83, then gave up. There was a time I would have spoken up, a time I might have pulled Lance aside, told him how I felt. But that time had passed. I had learned how fragile things could be once you started asking for too much. So I swallowed my pride and got up early the next morning. I washed the dishes no one asked me to wash, packed the leftovers no one offered me to keep, folded the tablecloth, scrubbed the sink. Then I took the trash out to the bins at the end of the driveway. I looked back at the house as I walked. The window lights were still off, everyone asleep. And it hit me like a quiet punch. That wasn't my home anymore. Maybe it hadn't been for a while. Maybe I'd been holding on to an idea, not a place. If you've ever found yourself invisible in your own family, I hope you know this. It's not weakness to walk away. Sometimes it takes more strength to step back than to keep pretending you're still welcome. Let's see where that strength took me. The Monday after Thanksgiving, I was up before sunrise. My hands smelled like garlic and lemon from marinating chicken thighs, and my knees ached from kneeling to clean under the fridge the night before. Kayla had left a note on the counter that read, "Deep clean pantry," in her looping script. No please, no thank you, just instructions. I tied my apron, not the one with flowers. Kayla said it looked too dated, but the plain beige one she brought home from a home goods store said it was neutral. That word stuck with me. Neutral. Like I wasn't supposed to leave a trace. By 9, I'd reorganized the spice rack, wiped down each jar, labeled the bins in the pantry, and taken out the recycling. I was rinsing the last baking sheet when I accidentally touched the edge of a pan that had come straight out of the oven. The burn made me drop it, and the pan clattered across the sink. Lance came down the stairs a minute later, yawning, rubbing his eyes. He looked at the pan on the floor, then at me, pressing a cold towel to my palm. "What happened?" he mumbled. I told him I burned my hand, said it lightly like it wasn't anything. He nodded and went for the coffee pot. Didn't ask if I needed a bandage. Didn't say to sit down. He just poured his mug, added cream, and scrolled through his phone like I wasn't even there. I rinsed the pan, still stinging from the burn, and placed it back on the drying rack. I wanted to sit. I wanted to breathe. But the laundry hadn't been folded yet, and the kitchen floor still needed scrubbing. Around noon, Kayla burst through the back door with grocery bags and the baby on her hip. She barely looked at me before launching into a complaint about the new school drop-off lane and how the neighborhood mums were driving her crazy. I nodded where appropriate, but mostly stayed quiet. When she placed the baby in my arms without a word, I bounced him gently and tried not to let the pain in my palm show. He reached for my necklace, my mother's old gold chain, and I let him tug. That afternoon, I stood at the stove reheating leftover green beans while Kayla sat at the kitchen island on her phone. She laughed at something on her screen and then glanced at me. "You know," she said, "not everyone's cut out for full-time help. You're holding up better than I thought." I didn't answer. I didn't even flinch. It was the first time she'd said it so plainly. Not mother-in-law, not family, not even Norma. Just help. When Lance got home from work that evening, he gave me a nod. Same as always. Not rude, not warm. Just flat. Like a boss acknowledging his assistant. I served dinner. I cleaned up. I took the baby while they went upstairs. That night alone in the guest room, I looked at the calluses on my fingers and the red line across my palm where the burn was beginning to blister. I thought about how quietly a person can be erased without a single cruel word spoken. And I wondered when exactly I stopped being a person and became a convenience. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders. Then I closed my eyes and decided for the first time in a long time not to do anything in the morning. Not unless I wanted to. And I didn't. Not anymore. It was a Wednesday morning when I noticed the blinking light in the kitchen ceiling. At first I thought it was the smoke detector, but it blinked in a rhythm that didn't make sense. Slow. Pause. Fast. Pause. I stood on a chair to look closer. A small circular lens sat just above the pantry door. New. Clean. Tucked neatly into the crown molding. I hadn't seen it before, and I had wiped those cabinets last week. I didn't say anything. Instead, I stood there a moment staring at it. My reflection was caught in the glass dome, distorted and small. Then I climbed down, fixed the chair, and swept the kitchen floor like I hadn't seen a thing. That afternoon, Kayla came home early. She was in a good mood, carrying 2 iced coffees and a shopping bag from a boutique downtown. She handed me a cup, then leaned against the counter. "Thought I'd treat us," she said. Her smile polished. I nodded, took a sip, and thanked her. She gestured toward the living room. "I've been reading about safety lately, elder monitoring. You know, making sure everyone's okay, even when you're not in the room." I kept my expression still. She talked about other women in her office who had installed full home systems for their in-laws. "It's the future," she said. "Smart homes, smart caregiving." That night, when everyone was asleep, I stood in the dark kitchen and looked directly at the camera. I held my stare longer than I meant to. The next morning, I tested a theory. I poured a second cup of coffee and left it out. I let the toast sit too long. I forgot to replace the paper towel roll. By lunchtime, Kayla asked if everything was all right, said I seemed off. I told her I was just tired, that I might need a nap. She smiled and said I should rest more. Then she added that the insurance paperwork would be arriving soon. She had found a policy that covered long-term care planning just in case. When I asked why she needed my documents, she said it was routine, that it would help with future-proofing, that she was looking out for me. I nodded, but my chest felt tight. Later that day, Lance pulled me aside, said Kayla was just being proactive, that we should all be thankful someone in the family was organized. I asked him if he knew about the camera. He blinked, looked to the side, said he thought it was for the baby monitor. Nothing more. But the baby had his own monitor, with its own screen, and that blinking light was too high, too central. It wasn't for a child. It was for someone they thought might forget, or fall, or wander, someone they didn't trust. Me. That evening I sat on the back porch and stared at the sky. The air was cool, and the neighborhood was quiet except for the hum of distant traffic. I thought about all the meals I'd cooked, the diapers I'd changed, the appointments I'd driven Kayla to when she was still pregnant. And now I was the risk. Not the grandmother, not the helper, just someone to monitor, to control, to quietly move out of the way. I didn't cry. I'd done enough of that years ago. Instead, I started making lists in my head. Who I still knew, what I still had, what I had kept in my name. I thought about the bank envelope in my coat pocket, the one I had picked up a week ago from the lottery office. Still sealed. They hadn't asked about it. They hadn't noticed when I left that morning or when I returned late. They thought I was invisible. And maybe that was the one thing working in my favor. They didn't know I was still paying attention. That Friday morning, a manila folder appeared on the kitchen counter. It wasn't there the night before, and no one mentioned it. But the way it sat, just slightly askew beside the fruit bowl, told me it was meant to be noticed. Kayla was upstairs getting the baby ready. Lance had already left for work. I walked past the folder twice before I finally picked it up. Inside was a neatly clipped stack of papers. Medical authorization forms, long-term care disclosure, durable power of attorney. All pre-filled, my name typed in every field. There was a yellow sticky note on top, in Kayla's handwriting. It read, "Just need your signature when you have a moment. No greeting, no explanation, just that." I stared at the paper that said I was consenting to be managed, that I was agreeing to give them authority over my medical decisions, my finances, my care. I put it back in the folder, closed it quietly, and placed it exactly where I found it. When Kayla came downstairs, she smiled and opened the fridge. "Let me know if you get a chance to review those," she said casually. "It's just routine. Paperwork for future planning. We don't want to wait until something happens." I nodded. She didn't press. Later that day, when she left for a meeting and the house was quiet, I took the folder again, but this time I scanned each page. I didn't just skim. I read. Every clause, every line. They weren't just preparing. They were transferring control to themselves, without a lawyer, without a witness. One page even listed an account number. It was mine. I recognized the last 4 digits, a small account I used for groceries. Somehow Kayla had found it. I put everything back, hands trembling, and stepped outside for air. The yard was cold. Winter had crept in early this year. I stood under the bare tree near the back fence, watching the wind blow through the dry grass. And then I remembered something. 2 years earlier, when I refinanced my old house before selling it, I had spoken with a woman named Rachel. She was a notary and estate consultant who had helped me consolidate things after my husband passed. She gave me her card, said I should call her if I ever needed help protecting anything. I still had the card. It was tucked into a cookbook in my suitcase. I kept it not because I planned to use it, but because something about Rachel felt solid, real. That night, after everyone went to bed, I locked the guest room door. I pulled out the card. It had a slight bend in one corner. Her number was still the same. The next morning, I waited until Kayla left to take the baby to music class. I told her I was feeling tired and would stay home. As soon as the garage door closed, I dialed. Rachel answered after 2 rings. Her voice was calm, steady. I told her everything. About the folder, about the camera, about the pressure, about the documents. She didn't react, didn't interrupt, just listened. Then she said one sentence that stayed with me. "You haven't signed anything. That means you still hold all the power." For the first time in weeks, I exhaled fully. Rachel agreed to meet me the next day. She said we'd go through everything quietly. No confrontations, no drama, just steps, legal ones. I thanked her, then hung up and returned the folder to its place. That afternoon, Kayla asked again if I'd had a chance to sign. I told her I was still thinking, that I didn't want to rush. She smiled politely, but there was a flicker in her eyes. A pause, just long enough for me to notice. She was keeping score, and now so was I. I chose the library parking lot on purpose, not because I needed books, but because it was neutral quiet, and just far enough from Kayla's neighborhood that no one would recognize me. Rachel pulled up exactly on time. She stepped out of her car in a long coat and low heels, holding a leather folder that matched her bag. She looked like she belonged in a courtroom. Steady, calm, practical. I needed that. We sat in her car, doors closed. I handed her the copied documents I had secretly made early that morning before Kayla woke up. She flipped through each page with a pen in hand, but didn't mark anything. She just nodded slowly. When she reached the power of attorney draft, she paused longer. Her brow tightened just slightly. This, she said, was not created with your interest at the center. She didn't need to explain further. I already knew. But hearing it out loud settled something in me. A kind of tired truth. She then asked what I wanted. Not what I feared, not what I hoped might change, just what I wanted. I told her I didn't want revenge. I didn't want drama. I just wanted control of my own life. And privacy. And peace. She smiled and said that was absolutely possible. She showed me a short list. Actions I could take quietly. One by one. Things that would not trigger suspicion. Things that would leave a paper trail in my favor. First, freeze all accounts in my name, no matter how small. She helped me call my bank, put alerts in place, set up new digital access codes. It took less than 15 minutes. Second, draft my own medical directives with her as witness and temporary custodian. I signed everything in the back seat of her car under the soft rattle of winter branches above us. Third, start a record. A private one, a handwritten logbook that listed every unusual comment financial request camera installed document left for me without explanation. She told me to keep it dated, consistent, and stored in my coat pocket. She also gave me a small audio recorder, thin, no larger than a pen. Legal in our state, she said, as long as one party knew. She didn't encourage me to use it recklessly, just for safety. When we finished, I felt both exhausted and oddly clean. Like someone had helped me rinse off a film I hadn't realized was covering me. As we stepped out into the chilly afternoon light, Rachel rested her hand on my arm. "You are not powerless," she said, "even if they want you to feel that way." I nodded. Then I drove back slowly. I took a different route home. Passing my old neighborhood, I glanced at the house I used to own. Someone had painted the shutters blue. A tire swing hung from the tree out front. By the time I reached Kayla's driveway, the sun had lowered behind the trees. I sat in the car for a few seconds watching the house. I noticed the curtains shift upstairs. She had been watching too. Inside, dinner was already in progress. Kayla greeted me with that same polished smile. Lance barely looked up from his plate. As I sat down, I caught my reflection in the glass of the microwave door. Same woman, same sweater, same seat at the far end of the table. But something had changed. Inside, I had shifted. They didn't know it yet. But I had stepped off their path. And quietly, I had begun to build my own. By the next week, the house felt colder, even though the thermostat stayed the same. It wasn't the weather. It was the way conversations stopped when I walked into a room. The way Kayla began shutting doors when she took phone calls. The way Lance avoided eye contact longer than usual. Something had shifted. I wasn't sure if they knew I had taken action. Maybe they sensed it. Maybe it was the absence of something they expected. Or maybe it was the simple fact that I no longer asked. That Friday evening, I was folding laundry when I heard soft voices from the upstairs hallway. The baby monitor on the counter had been left on, but the screen was dark. Still, the audio crackled faintly. I didn't mean to listen. But Kayla's voice came through first, low and sharp. "She's been quiet lately," she said. Almost too quiet. Lance responded, more hesitant. "I thought you wanted quiet. Less drama. She's not causing problems." There was a pause. "I just want to be sure we stay ahead," Kayla said. "We can't have her getting confused about whose house this is, or what's best for the baby." "She's not confused," Lance said. Kayla's reply came quick. "Then why hasn't she signed?" I stood frozen, not angry, just clear. Later that night, while washing dishes, Kayla came beside me, drying plates. She smiled in that way she did when she wanted something. Not warm, strategic. "We've been thinking," she said. "Maybe it's time you start looking into assisted living options, just in case things become too much." I nodded slowly. Then I asked, still looking at the water swirling in the sink, for who she didn't answer. Just set the plate down and left the room. I didn't confront. I didn't raise my voice. I dried my hands and went to the guest room. I pulled out the small logbook Rachel told me to keep. I recorded the conversation, the time, the words. Then I opened the envelope that held my notarized directives and made a copy to store in a second place. Not because I feared they'd find the original, but because I didn't want to underestimate them again. The next morning, Kayla was unusually cheerful. She brought me a fresh cup of tea and asked if I wanted to go with her to the farmer's market. I declined politely. She insisted, said it would be nice for me to get out. But something in her tone told me she didn't want company. She wanted me out of the house. I went anyway. In the car, she played music loud enough to avoid real conversation. At the market, she kept me close, introduced me to two of her friends as Norma, our live-in grandma, and laughed when they commented how lucky she was. She laughed with them. But her hand was tight on my elbow the entire time. When we returned home, I noticed a new document on the hall table. It was an intent to establish guardianship form, unsigned, but printed and ready. I said nothing. That night I lay awake long after the lights were out. It wasn't fear that kept me up. It was the realization that this wasn't about care. It was about control. And I had seen that before in other forms in other years. But never this quiet. Never this legal. They wanted a version of me that would stay in place, sign when told, and vanish when convenient. But I had already decided. I wouldn't be her. Not again. Not for them. The following Monday, I left the house before sunrise. I told Kayla I had a dentist appointment across town. She barely looked up from her coffee, just nodded and said to take my time. I walked to the corner bus stop and rode 3 stops past the clinic. At the main branch of the credit union, I stepped into the glass lobby and felt the warmth hit me clean and quiet. No one rushed. No one asked why I was alone. The manager, a woman named Tess, had silver hair and a sharp look that told me she'd seen everything. I handed her my ID and a sealed envelope, with a copy of the new financial directives Rachel had helped prepare. I explained that I wanted to remove any secondary access on my accounts, confirm my sole control, and add 2 security questions that only I would know the answers to. She didn't flinch. She asked no unnecessary questions, just typed, printed, handed me a form. Her pen tapped twice against the desk, and then she looked up. "You're not the first," she said, "and you won't be the last." I signed. She slid over another page. Would you like to update your beneficiaries? I did. I removed Lance's name. I removed Kayla's. I replaced them with a cause I cared about, a small local foundation that supported elderly women re-entering the workforce. It was something I had looked into months ago when I still had hope of sharing it with Kayla as a family legacy. Now it was mine alone. When I left the building, the sky had fully brightened. I walked a few blocks to a quiet diner and sat near the window. I sipped black coffee and stared out at the slow-moving traffic. Something inside me had shifted. It wasn't spite. It was clarity. I had lived most of my life tying my worth to the roles I played for others. Wife, mother, grandmother, helper. Now I was redefining that worth for myself. By noon, I was back home. Kayla didn't notice my absence. She was on a video call. The baby slept in the carrier beside her desk. That night, Lance called me into the living room. His tone was light, but his eyes didn't match. He said they had scheduled a meeting with a family advisor later that week, someone to help navigate elder care. He said it as if it were a gift, a courtesy. I told him I appreciated the thought but had already consulted someone, a professional. That caught him off guard. Kayla appeared in the hallway, arms crossed. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You've been seeing someone," she said. I nodded. "Just to ensure clarity," I replied. "No one should be confused about boundaries." The silence after that felt heavier than any argument. I turned and went back to my room. I pulled out the envelope from the lottery office, still unopened. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at it. I had waited because I wanted to know I could act on my own before knowing how much power I truly held. But tonight I didn't open it either. I didn't need it to prove anything. Not yet. That evening I logged each moment into my notebook. The phrasing Lance used, the expression on Kayla's face, the exact time and setting. Then I tucked the book away and exhaled. They were planning, watching, hoping I'd stay where they put me. But I had moved, and they hadn't noticed just how far. It was a Wednesday evening when Kayla announced there would be a dinner that weekend. Just family, she said. Something simple. She wanted to celebrate the baby's first steps and bring everyone together. She made the announcement while chopping vegetables. Lance sat at the kitchen island, scrolling on his phone. Neither looked at me when she said it, but I could tell it was important. I asked who was coming. Kayla said her parents, her sister and brother-in-law, a few close friends from her old job. She didn't say it, but I knew what she meant. People who mattered. I nodded and offered to help with the food. She paused a beat, then said, "No." She had it all handled. "Just enjoy myself," she added with that smile that never quite reached her eyes. I went upstairs and sat at the small desk by the window. I opened my notebook and wrote 2 words, dinner setup. Over the next few days, the house became a flurry of preparation. Groceries doubled. The baby was dressed up for practice photos in the living room. A cleaning service came through and scrubbed the kitchen twice in one morning. But no one asked what I would wear. No one mentioned a seat for me. On Saturday, I got up early and ironed my slacks, a soft navy sweater. I did my hair slowly, twisting the ends back and pinning them like I used to for church. I looked at myself in the mirror and whispered, "You're still here." Downstairs, the table was already set. White linen, silver flatware name cards, written in calligraphy. There wasn't one for me. I stood there for a long time before Kayla appeared in the hallway. Her eyes flicked to the empty seat at the end of the table, then to my hands folded neatly in front of me. "Oh," she said, tilting her head slightly, "we just thought you might prefer to rest. The baby's been a lot lately." I didn't answer. She added, "There's a plate for you in the kitchen." I turned and walked back to the guest room. I didn't cry. I didn't break anything. I sat on the edge of the bed and waited. Not for an apology. I knew none would come. Instead, I waited for the moment. Around 7:30, I heard glasses clinking and laughter rising from the dining room, the sound of forks against porcelain polite conversation floating beneath soft music. I walked down the hallway, slowly, notebook in one pocket, pen in the other. In the entryway, I paused, took a breath. Then I walked past the dining room without looking into the kitchen and straight to the garage. I opened the side cabinet and pulled out the sealed manila envelope I had hidden behind the emergency flashlights. The lottery check. I hadn't touched it since I brought it home. I peeled it open now, steady hands, clear breath. $986,000, still folded perfectly, still mine. That night I didn't eat the kitchen plate. I sat outside on the back porch with a blanket and a cup of tea, watching stars emerge behind the bare trees. Inside the house, they toasted without me. But I wasn't grieving that anymore. I was planning. Rachel and I had a meeting Monday morning. A real estate broker would be there. We were going to talk about options, about exits, about beginnings. They had their dinner, but I still had my seat. And it was going somewhere they'd never planned. Monday morning came with a thin frost on the car windows and silence in the kitchen. Kayla had already left for work, and Lance was upstairs with the baby. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time, making sure my coat was pressed scarf folded neatly. I didn't wear makeup often anymore, but I dabbed on a bit of color, just enough to make my eyes feel awake. I took the manila envelope with the check and placed it carefully into my tote. Then I pulled out a second envelope, this one thinner. Inside it was a single typed page folded once. That was the letter. Not a goodbye, not an explanation, just a clear outline of decisions made, financial boundaries, legal confirmations, a gentle but firm reminder of what I had chosen, and a line at the bottom that said, "I will no longer be residing here as of today." I left it on the hallway table, right next to the framed photo of Lance holding the baby. At 9:00 a.m., Rachel met me outside the cafe near the courthouse. She was already seated, 2 cups of tea steaming between us. She didn't say anything at first, just handed me a folder. Inside was everything: a finalized transfer of funds, a new mailing address, a notarized lease for a furnished apartment just outside of town, clean, small, with a garden and wide windows, and the paperwork for the foundation I had asked about. She smiled when I opened that part. "You'll be the founding sponsor," she said. "We've already drafted the mission statement, supporting women over 60 who want to re-enter the workforce or start their own ventures." My name was printed right at the top. That afternoon, I picked up the keys. The apartment wasn't much. 1 bedroom, simple kitchen, a small reading nook with a bay window. But it was mine. The next day, I returned to Kayla and Lance's house to collect the rest of my things. I didn't ring the bell. I still had my copy of the key. When I walked in, the letter was still there on the table, untouched. But the photo beside it was gone. I gathered my belongings quietly. Mostly books, a few scarves. My sewing kit, some framed photographs from years past. I left the guest room exactly as I had found it. Before I stepped out the door for the last time, I turned and looked into the living room. The sunlight had shifted, catching on the glass of the baby's toys. The silence in the house felt heavier than usual. It no longer belonged to me, and I was finally at peace with that. That evening, Rachel called and said the press release had gone out. The foundation would have a quiet launch in 2 weeks, hosted at the local community center. Nothing grand, just a tea, gathering a few small speeches, and a symbolic check handoff. I told her I'd be there. The day after, Lance called. I didn't answer. He didn't leave a message. Later, I listened to it once through the voicemail system. His voice was tight-clipped. He said he wished I had told him sooner, that Kayla was confused and upset. that they would have worked something out. But we both knew that wasn't true. And more importantly, it didn't matter anymore. The choices had been made. The silence between us now felt cleaner than the words we had exchanged in months. I sat by the window of my new place, watching the sun slip down behind the hill. Tea and hand check framed on the wall behind me. Not to flaunt, but to remember. Where I had been, and how far I had quietly come. It took a week before Kayla showed up at my apartment. I saw her through the lace curtain before she rang the bell. She wasn't carrying anything. No apology cake, no baby, just a heavy purse slung over her shoulder and that same tight expression she wore when she wanted to control the outcome before it even began. I opened the door, said nothing, and stepped aside. She entered like she owned the place. Her eyes darted around, taking in the plants on the windowsill, the books stacked by the couch, the framed check on the shelf. Her shoulders tensed at that last one. I didn't offer her tea. She didn't sit. I came to talk, she said, voice soft but clipped, about the foundation and how this sudden move of yours is affecting the family. I nodded once and stayed quiet. She filled the silence quickly. We were caught off guard. Lance, especially. You should have told us about the money, about your plans, about the apartment. Still, I said nothing. She pressed on. You disappeared, Norma. That's not how families work. You left a note like we were strangers. I met her eyes and said, because you treated me like one. Her mouth opened, then closed. She shifted her weight. The facade cracked just enough to show confusion underneath. She tried again. I'm not here to argue, but we're your family. We deserve a say in all this. What happens next? How things are handled. I walked over to the bookshelf and pulled out a folder. I handed it to her. Inside was a copy of the Foundation's charter, the mission statement, the bank's verification of my donation, and a formal notice revoking any financial association between myself and the household she ran so tightly. She flipped through it fast, as if speed would change the facts. When she looked up again, the control was gone from her face. In its place was something smaller, something I almost mistook for fear. I never meant for things to get so distant, she said. I believed her, but intentions didn't undo patterns. I'm not angry, I told her, but I'm done being managed. She stood in silence for a long moment, then slowly folded the folder closed. Before leaving, she turned at the door. People will talk, she said. I gave a half smile. Let them. She left quietly. The room held her absence for a while. I didn't rush to fill it. I let the stillness settle, the kind that comes when truth has finally been spoken aloud. That evening I took a slow walk around the neighborhood. The trees had begun to bud, early signs of spring trying to push through the last grip of cold. I passed two older women trimming a garden. They waved. I waved back. At home I watered the plants, set out the documents Rachel had prepared for the next phase of the foundation. A scholarship for single grandmothers, a mentoring circle for women over 60, the kind of work I had once dreamed of doing with my family. Now I would do it without them, not to punish, but to live. That night, I sat by the window and watched the apartment complex across the street go dark, window by window. I held the soft edge of the teacup in my hands and felt no weight of regret. Kayla had come to make her last play, but she was too late. The voice in the room now was mine. Clear, steady, uninterrupted, and finally heard. The launch event took place on a Sunday afternoon. No balloons, no press, just a quiet room at the community center with blue padded chairs arranged in a circle and a folding table in the corner where someone had laid out tea cookies and a bowl of lemons. I arrived early. Rachel was already there, smoothing the edge of a poster board with the foundation's name across the top. It looked simple, honest, not flashy or polished, but it carried weight. A few women arrived early. One wore a faded denim jacket and walked with a cane. Another carried a notebook clutched tightly to her chest. Each of them paused at the door before entering, as if they weren't sure this space really included them. It did. One by one, the chairs filled. There was no microphone, no big speech, just me. I stood and spoke about beginnings, about being overlooked, about how it feels to disappear inside your own family and forget what your name sounds like when you say it for yourself. I didn't name names. I didn't recount the check or the apartment or Kayla. I talked about dignity, about how some choices can only be made once you stop asking for permission to be seen. When I sat down, there was no applause, just nods, soft exhales, a few quiet tears from women who had been waiting a long time to feel that someone else understood. Afterward, one woman came up to me. Her hands were rough and warm. She said, "I thought I came here for information, but maybe I came here to remember myself." That night, I sat in my new apartment with the sliding door open to let in the early spring air. The check was still on the shelf, but it felt less important now. I thought about Lance. He hadn't called again. I thought about Kayla. I doubted she had told him everything. I thought about the baby, about whether one day he'd wonder where the woman from the guest room had gone, and whether he'd ever learn what she built after leaving. But I didn't linger there. Instead, I made a cup of tea, wrote notes from the meeting, logged the women's names, their needs, their ideas. We would start small, resume writing workshops, legal aid referrals, a potluck once a month. It wasn't grand, but it was real, and it was mine. Outside, a dog barked in the distance. The street lamp flickered on. Somewhere nearby, someone laughed loud and unrestrained. I didn't feel lonely. For the first time in years, I felt surrounded by something solid. Not people who needed me as a placeholder, but people who saw me whole. And when I went to bed that night, I slept through until morning. No dreams of empty chairs, no echo of doors closing, only quiet. And a growing sense that maybe, just maybe, this life was finally mine to shape. Spring deepened. The days grew longer, softer. My garden boxes started showing green tips where I planted lavender and basil. The air carried that kind of promise only early April can hold, quiet but full. The foundation was growing. 2 more women joined the circle. One had just left her daughter's house after years of being treated like a burden. Another had walked out of a long, silent marriage with nothing but a suitcase and her name. We sat around the same blue chairs, shared tea, shared silence. Sometimes laughter, too. I didn't need to lead. I just needed to listen. And in listening, I found pieces of myself I didn't know had been missing. One afternoon, I received a small envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a picture of the baby, a year old now, standing unsteadily, smiling with all his teeth. I touched the corner of the photograph. My name wasn't written anywhere, but I knew who had sent it. I didn't cry. I didn't call. I placed the photo inside a book of pressed flowers and let it be what it was. A thread, fragile, uncertain, but maybe still connected. I no longer lived in the past. I didn't carry resentment like luggage, but I remembered. And I chose each day to let that remembering guide me toward peace. Not revenge, not silence either. Just the kind of clarity that comes from walking away with your name still intact. Every morning I opened the window, let the air in, listened for the world beyond the life I left. And I never looked back with regret. only with the quiet strength of someone who finally stood up not for a fight, but for herself. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, or like your worth was decided by someone else, this story might have echoed something inside you. Leave a comment if you've walked a similar path. And if you're still in the middle of your own silence, I hope you know that peace doesn't always come from being heard. Sometimes it begins the moment you hear yourself.